You can wait about 30 seconds. We'll cue you to start.
Okay, okay.
You can go ahead.
Welcome to Brown University. This is a special event um, broadcast live to worldwide audiences. My name is Ashutosh Varshney. Um, I'm director for the Center for Contemporary South Asia and professor of political science here at Brown University at its Watson Institute. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Rahul Gandhi um, to our audiences. Rahul Gandhi has been a member of parliament in India, Lok Sabha, since 2004. He represented the constituency of Amethi in the North Indian state of UP in 2004, 2009, and 2016. And since 2019, he's been representing Wayanad constituency in the South Indian state of Kerala. He has been president of the Congress Party 2017 to 2019, and before that was vice president of the Congress Party, a party, as most of you know, has ruled India since 1947, with the exception of 1977 to 80, 1989 to 91, 1998 to 2004, and since 2014, it's not been in power in Delhi. Rahul Gandhi was educated in 3 countries: in India at St. Columbus, Doon School, and St. Stephen's; in the United States at Harvard and Rollins College; and in the UK at Cambridge University. He took his MPhil in development studies from Trinity College of Cambridge. Our event will have 3 segments. The first segment will be my conversation with him for half an hour. Each segment will have half an hour. The second segment will feature a faculty panel from Brown for half an hour, and 4 of our colleagues from different departments will join the conversation. And the last 30-minute segment is for our students. There is a student panel, again, from different disciplines, which will be posing questions to Rahul Gandhi. This is an international event. We are in the Zoom and YouTube universe. Some of our panelists are joining us from elsewhere, not from Boston or Providence, the 2 towns where the faculty lives, Brown faculty lives. Most of it, of course, in Providence, but some of us live in Boston. I live in Boston. I'm joining you from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Prerna Singh, my political science colleague, will be joining us from Stanford, California. She is spending a semester there on a fellowship. Leela Gandhi, my colleague in the English department, will be joining us from London, UK, and she is actually teaching this semester, teaching her Brown class from London. That's possible in the Zoom universe. And 2 of our student panelists will be joining us from India, one from Shimla and one from Delhi. So let's start. Welcome, Rahul Gandhi.
Thank you.
Brown.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to host you, and hope there'll be an opportunity to host you in person as well in future. Let me start with a remark that caught my eye. You made 2 weeks back at Cornell. You argued that politics in India, especially electoral politics or politics in general, is no longer a fight for power. Politics in India have become a fight for India, not just a fight for power. Now, we noted in November, during the last presidential election in the United States, that Joe Biden, now president of the United States, made a claim which had roughly similar properties, and you'll tell us whether your claim is different. He argued that the election of 2020 was not about a change in power in Washington. It was about the soul of America. Is your claim, Rahul, and may I call you Rahul during this conversation? Is your claim similar to Biden's claim or substantially different?
Well, to me, India is many different diverse viewpoints, many different languages, different cultures, different histories, different ideas. And modern India, to me, is essentially an ongoing negotiation between those ideas, those cultures. And what Gandhiji did, what our founding fathers did, is they created the architecture for that negotiation. Centerpiece of that architecture, of course, is one man, one vote and the Constitution. And then from that idea of one man, one vote and the Constitution arose many independent institutions which guarantee the negotiation. It's very obvious to me that those institutions are what allow the negotiation between our identities, between our languages, between our cultures, between our states to occur. What I see is a determined attack on those institutions and a capture of those institutions. There are elements of that taking place in the United States. But of course, I'm nobody to comment on the United States. I don't understand the United States as well as my American friends there would. But I get the sense that the American institutions are showing much more resilience than the Indian ones. I get the sense that the American system is actually countering this onslaught better than our system. To me, if the negotiation between these states breaks down, then the idea of India breaks down. Before 2014, there was an assault on institutions by the RSS, by similar forces, concentration of capital, you can say, but it was subversive. It was being silently done. It was done in Madhya Pradesh. It was done in states that they ran. It was done through the Shishu Mandirs, through their schools. It was done by siphoning off public funds into their schools. But it wasn't out in the open. What's happened is in 2014, it is out in the open, it's legitimized, and it's across the board. And to me, that's why it's an attack on India. See, I represent a part of that negotiation, as do all other political players. As you know, we represent 20% of, the Congress party represents 20% of our population. Other opposition parties together represent a much bigger chunk than the Prime Minister and the BJP. But we're not given that room for negotiation. We're not given that room for conversation. That's what's changed. And as a politician, I require institutional support. I simply cannot operate without it. It's a fantasy if somebody thinks that I can operate or a democracy can operate without independent institutions. That we don't have anymore. That's why I classify it as an assault on India.
Are you in particular referring to the judiciary or some other independent institutions?
I'm referring to every single institution. There's not a single institution that is not under this type of assault. I mean, to give you some nuance, my mic is switched off in Parliament. In the middle of while I'm giving a speech, it's switched off. Right. So the essence of Parliament is that I'm allowed to speak. Right. The essence of Parliament is that when I'm speaking, the country can see what I'm saying. That the TV is showing what is going on in Parliament. The TV doesn't show what's going on in Parliament. Right.
So whole variety of institutions.
No, I'll elaborate. So
yeah,
the conversation within Parliament, BJP MPs cannot have an open discussion in Parliament. They tell me that. They're like, हमें तो बस बता दिया जाता है क्या बोलना है. It's a straightforward top-down thing. They cannot go. One BJP MP went in a meeting with the Prime Minister and raised his hand and said, I don't agree with you. And, they threw him out. It's the same with the judiciary. It's the same with the press. So it's a constant onslaught. And that's where the problem is.
And the idea of India that you were speaking about is essentially built on diversity and expression of that diversity, right?
Yes, it is built on diversity and expression of that diversity, but more importantly, it is a negotiation between those ideas. It is an active, dynamic, constant negotiation. And that negotiation requires structures for that negotiation to take place.
Okay, so you're defining
when the British was leaving India, the question was transfer of power to whom? That was the challenge. Who do you transfer power to? And it was the Congress party that created the environment for the transfer of power. The British were asking a legitimate question in the 20s. They were saying, okay, to whom do we transfer power? Not to the Maharajas, obviously, because the Maharajas were not India. The Maharajas were a divided India which was at war with itself. So the answer to that question came from Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress party. They said, okay, yes, to whom? To the people of India. How? Through the vote. How? Through parliament. How? Through the constitution. And then further development, how? Through these institutions that will protect the voice of the people of India. So it's not just a question of diversity. It's a question of active negotiation taking place between that diversity.
Okay. As a lot of people have noted, this has been an international commentary on this matter. Two of the leading agencies, non-governmental agencies in the world that rate or assess democratic health in the world, the Freedom House and the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden, which has risen to prominence of late, both have downgraded Indian democracy. Freedom House calls India now partly free, not unfree, partly free. And that is after 30 odd years that India has been downgraded. The VDEM Institute in Sweden uses a stronger term. India has the largest democracy, and I'm citing now, the largest democracy in the world has become an electoral autocracy. Electoral autocracy is the term it has used. Not yet a full autocracy, but electoral autocracy. Now, I have two questions. One, do you agree with this assessment, the assessment of Freedom House? They're roughly in the same direction. They're slightly different, but roughly they're both talking about a steep decline, a steep democratic decline in India. Do you agree with that assessment? And second, VDEM Institute, following political science and its own research, has also said something which people have not noted yet, and on which I think we should seek your comment. It says that when polities, democratic polities, start attacking civil liberties and then civil society institutions, and then independent institutions, then the next step normally, there is no law about this, there is a tendency they're talking about. The next step after an attack on civil liberties, an attack on civil society, an attack on independent institutions, next step is typically an attack on the integrity of elections itself. So the second question after the first question, which is about, do you agree with these two agencies? The second question is, are you concerned that the integrity of elections might also be attacked before long?
Look, I mean, these institutions, of course, have their view. They are foreign institutions. And frankly, we don't need a stamp from them. But directionally, what they're saying is correct. I would add one thing. I would say they're much behind the curve. I think the situation is actually much worse than they imagine, first. Second, again, you cannot separate electoral democracy from institutional frameworks, right? An election is not simply people going and pressing a button on a voting machine. An election is about narrative. An election is about institutions that make sure that the framework in the country is operating properly. Election is about a judiciary that is being fair. Election is about a debate that is taking place in parliament, right? So you need those things for the vote to count. You know, Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi used to have elections. They used to win them. They were actually voting. It wasn't that they weren't voting, but there was no institutional framework to protect that vote. So to me, India is going to find out that it's actually much further down the curve than it thinks and that outsiders think.
I see. So if anything, you're saying Freedom House and WeDem Institute are behind the curve. The situation is much worse.
Yeah, and I'm saying the sequence that you first attack this, then you attack the vote. I'm saying you don't need to attack the vote. With modern technology, if you control WhatsApp and you control Facebook, you don't need to attack the vote. Why would you do something like that? Leave it alone. You control the narrative anyway. The head of Facebook in India everybody knows is a BJP person.
I see.
One girl recently left the Congress party, went to Facebook, right? They found out she's Congress. She had a job contract. Sorry, you can't come. She's crying at my door. So you don't need to do that. I mean, they might do that. They might actually say dispense with this thing, but you can destroy an electoral democracy in the 21st century if you've got Facebook, if you've got WhatsApp, if you've got financial dominance, and if you control the institutions. Why wouldn't you let people just go and vote? Why wouldn't you just keep that pretense? No problem. Why does it harm you? It legitimizes you.
Okay, so the elections can become simply a legitimating device rather than a method of selecting governments. That we can.
Which is what I mean. We've seen it in the 20th century, right? We've seen these guys coming to power just with this legitimization of the vote. I mean, there's no reason Saddam Hussein needed the vote, but it was like, okay, let's do it. You know, let's just do it. Why not?
Yeah. My third question is,
sorry, it's by the way, if you look at the strategy employed by the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and the strategy employed by the RSS, it's implicit in what they're doing. It's in there, right? They're basically saying capture power through the electoral process, capture the institutions, and then the electoral process is irrelevant.
Okay. My third question is about foreign policy and international relations. Everyone has noted, and rightly so, that China is now a new global superpower. And certainly in the United States, but in much of the Western world, the notion that there is a serious rivalry emerging between the United States on the one hand as the leading superpower and China as the emerging superpower, that rivalry is seriously underway now. What are the implications of China's rise to uh, global a global superpower status? What are its implications for India, according to you?
I mean, again, China's rise has been taking place for some time now. And for example, the success the Chinese have had in manufacturing uh, is causing some of our political tremors, right? The Trump supporters, a lot of the Trump supporters and a lot of the supporters of the BJP, they are Trump supporters and BJP supporters because of large-scale joblessness. That's why the failure of manufacturing, so to speak. So China's rise has been affecting our politics for some time now. And it affects it in multiple ways. For example, if you go into the details of Karnataka politics was blown apart because of iron ore exports to China, right? So it affects it at the state level, it affects it at the national level. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is the Chinese clearly have a strategy. It's very clear. And the strategy is take the planet back to a terrestrial vision. And it's a economic strategy. It has a military strategy, but it isn't essentially an economic strategy. What they're presenting to people who are looking at the Belt and Road is prosperity, right? And they're putting a lot of money behind that prosperity. In a sense, they're doing what the United States did post-World War, giving a lot of money to Italy, to Germany, to France, to these countries, and saying, look, we will help you rise. There is no counter strategy to that. So we work with the Americans. We have a partnership with Americans. We are two democracies. We have a lot in common, but there is no clear strategy of prosperity between the United States and her allies. I don't see it. So to me, that is something that has to be figured out. And if you're going to, of course, you don't want to go into a conflict, but if you're going to go into a successful competition, you need to have a strategy of prosperity.
In other words, the primary plank of Indian strategy towards China, according to you, should be economic, a search for economic prosperity, policies that promote economic prosperity would be the best way to deal with China rather than something else.
It's one step further than that. Mm-hmm. We have two problems. Well, we have many problems, but centrally, there is an issue with the Chinese rise, but there is a massive issue with job creation in India, with our economic situation in India. We have to resolve that problem. And I'm not one who believes that we can resolve that problem through the services route. I just don't think it's possible. So what does it mean? It means that it is a strategy for the reinvigoration of India. You strengthen India and you will solve both problems.
Through manufacturing, you're saying labor-intensive manufacturing is the way to go, not services.
No. It's not simple black and white. Mm. It is, we have released hundreds of millions of people from our villages. They have come to our cities. We need to give them something to do. We need to give them a vision. We can, however we do it, we got to do it. We got to do it by transforming agriculture. We got to do it by transforming manufacturing. We got to improve our competitiveness in services. But we are facing a catastrophic job problem. And it is related. if India cannot solve its job problem, then India certainly cannot have a global position, certainly cannot take on the challenges that are coming from the Chinese. And
So a
that is not to say you don't need a military strategy. Of course you do.
Okay, and my last question in my half hour is about 2019 elections. In December 2018, your party won 3 states, and the narrative in the country was Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh was a huge victory. And the narrative by January of 2019 was that Congress party was going to be a serious contender for power. It may not get 273 seats, but it will certainly increase its share of seats very substantially and pose a challenge to the existing ruling party. By May 2019, 5 months later, 4 to 5 months later, when the results came, your party went up by only a few seats, whereas BJP enhanced its majority, enhanced its vote by 7%, and your vote was 19.5, 19.6. So BJP's vote was twice as large as your vote in 2019 May. What changed between December 18 and May 2019, transforming the political landscape, electoral landscape so much that you were unable to gain much from your victories in December 2018 at the state level?
There are our Chhattisgarh party, and I agree with them on Chhattisgarh for sure, simply cannot explain how we go from a solid 2/3 victory to 2 seats. They just cannot explain it, right? And I find it very hard to believe that something like that happened. Similar in Rajasthan, right? We had a solid fight, and suddenly we go to 0 seats. Now, it's surprising to me. It's not easy to believe. Now, there are a couple of arguments that people make, and I can see some aspects of those arguments, right? Massive polarization across North India, I can see it, but it doesn't take me to 2 seats in Chhattisgarh. Massive polarization combined with total media dominance, financial dominance, Facebook, WhatsApp, social media dominance, yeah, could be. But those are some of the reasons. You see, again, if you look at the amount of money the BJP is throwing at elections, compare them to what we are doing or what other political parties are doing, and no comparison. It's a ratio of 1:10, right? More. You look at the media, the Prime Minister is 24/7 in the media. Nobody else is there. No other leaders on the television, right? So there's total domination of that stuff. And then in addition to that, you also have domination of institutions. So to me, it is massive concentration of political and financial power that is sitting behind this machine.
And that explains the 2019.
I mean,
to a substantial extent, you argue.
I still don't understand the Chhattisgarh going from a sweep, with a solid set of candidates to 2 seats. I still can't explain it, but the explanations that are given to me, I'm like, okay, maybe.
Okay. Thank you, Rahul. My half hour is up. So let's bring the faculty panel in. The first colleague of mine who's going to ask you a question is Andrew Foster. He is the George and Nancy Parker Professor of Economics. And Andrew, you are on screen.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. So I wanted to sort of recognize you've called for the repeal of the farm laws, but also note that there's sort of considered view that rural poverty in India will remain a major issue as long as there's so many small and marginal farmers, and as long as the supply chains operate, they do. So I'm wondering if you can give us an alternative vision, both of sort of how transformation is likely to happen or should happen over the 5 and 10 years, and what kinds of policies will help make that happen.
Yeah. So what we are against, first of all, we agree that a reform of the agricultural system is required. We also feel that any reform of the agricultural system has to come out of a conversation with the stakeholders of that system. Who are the stakeholders of that system? Farmers, producers, people who manage that system, etc. Our first problem with the farm laws is that there is no conversation that has taken place with the stakeholders. They're not even explained what is happening. The second thing is, to me, the thing you have to look at is the producer. And you have to empower the producer and make him efficient, make his negotiation more effective, etc., etc. Here, there's a full-scale assault on the producer. So literally now the producer is going to be negotiating with Mr. Adani and Mr. Ambani with nobody in between, right? I mean, you know the three laws. The first law basically says no farmers markets. The second law says as much hoarding as you want. And the third law says you can't go and contest it in court. So it is clearly an assault on the farm structure. So we don't agree with that, and we think that it is going to be extremely destructive. In fact, I feel that the BJP simply will not have the power to push these things through. And if they do forcibly do it, we are going to head into some serious social turbulence, right? Indian agriculture, as you saw in the corona, is sort of a shock absorber for a lot of these people. It acts as a place for them to gain respite. So that role is critical in Indian agriculture, right? So how do you think about it? Yes, you think about supply chains. Yes, you think about storage. Yes, you think about cold storage systems. But you think about it by empowering the producer, by involving the producer in the conversation, and that can be done. It's not a complicated thing, right? I think you will need to also transform our agricultural system from a jobs perspective. So you will also have to bring in technology, bring in those nodes into that system so that you can give, I think agriculture can give millions and millions of jobs to people in India if it's done properly. So we're not arguing for no reform of the agricultural system. We're arguing for a reform, but a reform that carries the stakeholder and listens to the stakeholder and involves the stakeholder. I mean, there are many successes. The biggest success in India, agricultural success in India, is Amul, right? And that is essentially, that came out of conversation with farmers. Now, I'm not saying you can replicate Amul all across the country, but the spirit of Amul, where you say, okay, we value what you're doing. We understand that you're struggling. Now let's have a conversation about how we can make this thing work. That's how I think about it.
So I mean, I think a particular concern would be the sort of small and marginal landowners and whether the kinds of sort of technological advances that you mentioned are going to be feasible for many of them to the extent that they involve sort of larger scale. So is there a way to sort of address that problem? And those are the people probably most resistant to change.
There are models in Maharashtra and different ways of doing things that would do that. But the main question to ask is, okay, you carry out this assault on agriculture, and now you have large-scale corporate farming. You have one guy who's controlling the wheat market. I think he's controlling basically grain in India. He controls all the silos. He controls all the ports. You've decimated the farmers. Okay, now what do? Can they get a job?
Yeah.
In the
Fair enough.
agricultural system? No, they can't. Can they get a job in the manufacturing system? No, they can't. What are they going to do?
Mm-hmm.
So what you're seeing in Punjab right now, if the laws go through, you will see that at a massive scale. It'll come slowly. But when it comes, then the negotiation is not possible. So the negotiation is, you have to see, if you think about it, India is going through a transformation. It's going through from a rural to an urban transformation. And in a sense, the imagination is changing. So you have to help people through that imagination. You can't just say, sorry, boss, now you have this imagination, I'm going to explode it for you. And oh, by the way, figure out your imagination on your own.
Fair enough.
Right? It's the same thing they did with GST, right? We are for a GST, but negotiate the thing. Go through the conversation, and once you're ready with the conversation and everything's ready to go, then do it. Right? It's the idea. See, if you ask me, it is massive concentration of capital, 5 or 7 people, massive concentration of political power, which gives the illusion that you don't have to negotiate with anybody. But then when you put the thing into practice, the power of these forces becomes very apparent. And then you're suddenly like, oh my God, what just happened, right? So that's the problem. And I don't think it's simply a Narendra Modi issue. I actually think that the negotiation within the Indian system is struggling. We are having problems with that negotiation that I spoke about. We're technology, communications, we are having difficulty maneuvering. And I think one response to it is Modi and RSS, right? Imagine Europe. India is much better compared to a Europe than to a United States. We have many languages, we have many different types of people. Now imagine if you tried to run Europe forcibly through Belgium. What would happen? Well, Hitler tried to do it, right?
Sure.
Hitler basically said, listen, I can run Europe. I don't need to talk to the French. I don't need to talk to the Italians. I'm going to run Europe. You see what happened to him. Right?
Rahul, are you saying that a better imagination about rural India will be a negotiated imagination?
I'm saying that the only imagination is a negotiated imagination. I'm saying there is no other imagination, right? If you stop the negotiation, if you destroy the architecture of negotiation, you don't have a country. When I go to Tamil Nadu, when I'm going and giving a speech in Tamil Nadu, it's part of the negotiation. I'm going there and they're saying, okay, what is the contract that Tamil Nadu is going to have with the rest of India? Right? It's embedded in the system. If you attack that, you will not realize, but the blowback that will come will be unstoppable. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
I'll give you, Andrew, one more thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at what happened to Pakistan, this is exactly what happened to Pakistan. The negotiation between the ethnicities of Pakistan was dominated by the Punjabis. And the institutional structure that did it was the Pakistani army. Right? And then you had a democratic framework crumbled. Because the only way now, once you've broken the negotiating framework, the only way to keep it together is force.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's turn to Leela Gandhi. She's joining us from London, as I said. John Hawkes Professor of the Humanities and English. Leela.
Mr. Gandhi, on the heels of that beautiful thought about negotiated imagination, the concept of Swaraj, self-rule, was, of course, a rallying cry for the Congress Party in the early decades of the 20th century. It was a slogan for independence from imperial rule. And as well, at the source, say in M.K. Gandhi's Hind Swaraj, it expressed a highly original, ethical and spiritual vision of Indian democracy as one in which, simply, the powerful give up the right to rule over, dominate, oppress, injure the powerless. Therefore, men over women, the Hindu majority over various religious minorities, rich over poor, and of course the list is very long indeed. So my question is, what does Swaraj mean, if anything, to Congress leadership in the 20th century, and to you personally?
See, the idea of India, if you look at how India was put together and modern India, and the role of Gandhiji in that bringing India together, he was essentially in the conversation, in the negotiation of power between these systems. He took a very interesting position. His position was, in a sense, it's a Indian philosophical tradition. I don't actually exist. I am dead. Meaning, I have no game in this conversation, right? So he, in a sense, if you say, he became shunyata, right? And then that conversation actually started. Without that thing, without Gandhi's attack on himself, India could not have been structured. The negotiation wouldn't have begun, right? So the idea of India itself required a introspection into the self and then an attack onto the self. And frankly, if you want to keep India together, you've got to do that. If you don't do that, if there is no shunyata in the negotiation, then it's not going to work. That's what the Congress brings to the table, right?
Shunyata.
The idea, right? Now, for example, do you think today there are 20 people who are group of 20 people who have a different view on the Congress party, right? Do you think they could exist in the BJP? Do you think they could exist in the BSP? Do you think they could exist in the TMC? No, they cannot exist in any other party except the Congress. And the Congress says, look, we don't agree with you, but the negotiation cannot stop. It has to go on. That's the nature of the Congress. And I see it in the organization every day, right? Now, of course, it has lost the depth of Gandhi is not there. The understanding of Gandhi, Nehru, that's not there. But that comes with the force that you're fighting. Gandhi would not have been Gandhi without the force that he was fighting.
You've said something really extraordinarily beautiful, but I think this is you and not necessarily the Congress party, and you've replaced my idea of Swaraj with a really beautiful idea of Shunyata, and I want to throw you out on this.
No, you'd be surprised. You'd be very, very surprised. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Congress workers who have this idea. Hundreds and hundreds. Problem is, they're not in power. But they're there. I can tell you name after name after name after name who is sitting there and literally doing harakiri, right? Political, he's eating himself. It's the opposite of the RSS. This is not a new thing, huh? And you said Gandhiji came out with a new idea. It's not a new idea. It's a very old idea in India. it's a regurgitation of some of those ideas. But and in Hind Swaraj, what he's saying is that Western civilization is not looking into itself. It refuses to look into itself. And the Indian civilization has the capacity every now and then to look into itself very deeply.
And to give up power, to say no to...
Look, you might give up power, you might not give up power. Gandhi didn't. If you take a blunt view of power, you can say Gandhi gave up power. But if you take a sophisticated view of power, Gandhi used his power to give us the constitution. Right? Power is not simply that, oh no, now I have to become an MLA or an MP. This is a gross misunderstanding.
Sure.
Right? Power is what? Power is the ability to influence. Are you telling me Gandhiji gave up the ability to influence? He's still influencing. He's influencing me. Right? But the essence of Swaraj, and which I think any modern vision of India has to have. And my biggest problem with the BJP and the RSS is they have no capacity to look inside themselves. I was in Parliament one day and I was reading this book on the Upanishads. And I got an RSS guy who, I just walked past him and he said, he had said something in Parliament 2-3 days back. And I said, look, it's written here. Look what's written here. This is against what you said in Parliament. And he looks at it and he says, ye to aapko nahi samajh aayegi. Meaning, you do not have the capacity to understand this. I am the only person who has the capacity to understand this. Right? Meaning, I will not look into myself for 30 seconds. My problem with the Prime Minister is that you are cracking the negotiation between these massive forces because you refuse to attack your sense of self. And I'm very happy with you because you attack my sense of self every morning. So I love it because it gives me, in a sense, it's a very strange thing.
Spiritual gift.
I just think that, my God, this is amazing. I think, when you're facing a political force, people don't understand the nature of that thing. People think, oh my God, they're attacking him. No, they're helping me. They're helping me refine. They're helping me understand. I could not have this conversation I'm having with you today 10 years ago. Who did it? The BJP RSS did it. So thank you.
Okay. Right? Thank you.
So what I'm saying is, but just to conclude, what Gandhiji was saying, and he was saying it to everybody, stop and look at what you're doing. When you just 30 seconds, stop and just ask yourself, what I'm doing, is this correct? And what he was saying to Indians when they were faced by the British is, you are enslaved, not because the British are powerful, but because you're refusing to look into yourself. And that's all he taught us.
True. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
let's turn to, we have 10 more minutes for the, 10 more minutes for the faculty panel. Patrick, you have 5 minutes and Prerna will have 5 minutes. Patrick Heller, Lindcross Professor of Sociology.
Thank you, Ashu. Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for being with us today. I want to pick up on this theme of negotiation, which I find absolutely fascinating. And you've talked about negotiation as the democratic process in of itself and defending the range of institutions that are foundational to any democracy that really does allow for negotiation and deliberation. There's also obviously negotiating India's identity and self-imagination, Hindutva versus the more pluralistic vision that we associate with democratic India. There's a third negotiation we haven't touched on yet, which is a negotiation over how society's resources are being distributed. And I want to take you back to the UPA and the 10 years that Congress was in power. And looking back on it now, I think we've all come to realize increasingly that the great legacy of the UPA government was building the basic architecture of the Indian welfare state, a truly remarkable set of interventions. And so I've two related questions. One, given just how successful NREGA and the other welfare and rights-based interventions were and how encompassing they were, why didn't this translate into more electoral success? How do we explain 2014?
Very profound question.
Yeah, and so in part also it was the BJP's victory in 2014 kind of an elite reaction, an upper class reaction against this expansion of rights. And then just very briefly, how would you evaluate the BJP's track record on the welfare state and on social rights in general?
We understood in 2004, 2005, that large numbers of our people were transforming their imagination. So they were going from a rural imagination to a completely new space. And this is not understood by somebody who hasn't made this transition. But if you spend time working in that space, you will realize this is a terrifying thing. This is not an easy thing to do. And it generates tremendous anger, fear, panic. And we understood that we have to put a floor under these people as they make this transition. So we have to do something so that this change of imagination happens across a bridge. They don't need to just jump, right? And that was NREGA, that was right to food, that was all those paradigms. We got a massive reaction because this was a cost on certain elites, right? So farmers didn't like NREGA, right? So what did we do? As the Congress does, the Congress searches for pain. You know, people say left or right. No, it looks for pain and it manages pain. So we did NREGA, farmers felt pain. We did the 72,000 crore farmer relief package, right? So we managed that pain. But the concentration of power that has happened, concentration of political power through the RSS, concentration of economic power through the 5, 7, 10 crony capitalists, essentially translated into massive political power across the board. And it just overwhelmed all that. Of course, in 2014, we had a problem, which was that the vision that you're talking about was running out of steam. It was actually a 1990s vision, repurposed and with some additions in 2004. And it worked very well for 8 years. And I remember I was with one of my colleagues in 2000 I think it was 11, and we were driving and we said to each other, this vision is not working anymore. It's not working, right? So we came to the end of a vision, which is normal, right? So we got hit with the economic collapse, 2000, that big collapse. Then we got caught with the sort of at the end of our vision. And then we had this massive shock wave coming. The RSS has been at work for many years trying to infiltrate and capture the institutions. And, they've spent a lot of time and effort doing it. So that culminated in 2000, began in 2014, and now they're putting in sort of their people.
Thank you.
But my guess is if you don't do it, which the BJP is not doing, you will enter a zone of mass politics, which will be expensive, costly, but you will go there.
Thank you. Let's turn now finally to Prerna Singh, Mahatma Gandhi Associate Professor of Political Science and International Studies. Prerna, you're joining us from Stanford.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gandhi. I think today you've spoken very thoughtfully, very powerfully about two themes that I wanted to pick up on. The first was about this control of the narrative by the BJP, and the second about this assault on institutions. And so, as has come out in your conversation, especially with Professor Gandhi today, you're putting forward this secular, inclusive idea of India, which stands in stark contrast to the exclusive Hindu nationalist idea. And I had a question about the way in which you're putting out this alternate idea, and in particular, the role, picking up on your theme of the assault on institutions, about your vision of the institution that you are a part of and that you exert some control over, which is the Congress Party. So as a political scientist, when I follow the trajectory of the Congress, I learn in a kind of politics of India class that you might take about something that happened to the Congress really beginning in the late 1960s under Mrs. Gandhi, which was the deinstitutionalization of the Congress and the personalization of power. And today you've spoken a lot about the role of the RSS and the Shakha structure in the way in which the BJP operates, is effective. And I think as you just said in response to Professor Heller's question, has been really instrumental in kind of spreading the message and indeed rooting the message, we might say, of Hindu nationalism among the people. And so I was wondering, how would you think of the role of the Congress Party, particularly because it was deinstitutionalized in the 1960s? One of the arguments that's put forward is that this cadre structure of the organization as it enters the hinterland is what was destroyed or at least weakened. And so how are you thinking of the civil society, the grassroots organizational structure of the Congress? What role does that play in the kind of spread of this alternate narrative? And secondly, the point about the personalization of power, this is definitely something that you've pointed out has happened in the BJP, but to what extent has it happened in the Congress? And what do you think of the place, the potential, but also the challenge of dynastic politics?
The Congress Party has never had a cadre, and it doesn't believe in a cadre. And the day the Congress Party has a cadre, it becomes the BJP. A cadre is a person who puts out a particular message. He's a pracharak. He puts out a particular ideology. That's not what a Congress worker does. A Congress worker manages a negotiation. Two fundamentally different things. This idea that there was a Congress Party that had these, workers in brown shorts that used to do all this is just wrong. It has never existed. What the Congress Party had were people coming out of these movements that were negotiating settlements. And our big negotiator was Mahatma Gandhi. And then there was Nehru and others, right? But the Congress has never had a structure that goes out and puts across its message. That's just not what we do. That's what the RSS does. That's what the BSP does. We don't need a cadre. We don't want a cadre. What we want is people who manage who operate as the bridge between communities, right? That's one. Second thing, the Congress, in the split of the Congress, was an ideological fight in the Congress, which was won by the left. You can call it the left, but it was won by a particular ideology in the Congress. The dismantling, so to speak, of the institutions of the Congress was essentially the right of center people leaving. The idea that no one replaced them is fantasy, right? Devaraj Ars and our entire Congress operation in Karnataka, they were formidable politicians who replaced those people, right? Of course, Indira Gandhi had a role there, right? But the notion that Congress is a cadre-based party and there's these lines of people getting ready to put them as this is not what the Congress is. It's a misunderstanding of the idea of the Congress. I'll give you, and I learned this the hard way. So this is not something that came naturally here. So the first My first 3-4 years in the Congress, I just used to sit there and be like, what are these people doing? So we would sit there and they would just go on and on and on and on. Just and I would say that I would walk out and say, well, ye kya ho raha hai? Why are these people just having this conversation, ongoing conversation? And a lot of the time they just repeat what they were saying. So one guy would say it, a second guy would say it, third guy would say it. And I was like, what is this going on? And then I realized, took me 5 or 6 years, but I realized that's exactly the point.
So
the point is that...
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that there is a party organization, but it's...
Completely.
Okay, that it conducts...
It's not the Nazi party. It's not the RSS. It's a different design. Right? I've got workers. What my workers do, or our workers do, is go into an area where there is a conflict between Congress people and say, "Bhaiya, idhar aao, beto, kya ho raha hai? Chalo batao." What the RSS guy says, "Oh, you, please shut up. You do what we're telling you." That's not what we do. We're a negotiating system. We're a negotiating platform. Our problem is that the negotiation between communities in India has fractured. That's our problem. Right? When there is no negotiation taking place between the Hindu and the Muslim, or the Sikh and the Hindu, or the Tamil and the Bengali, we have a problem. Our problem is not an organizational problem. Our problem is that the negotiation is broken. And we can see that the negotiation is starting. I'll tell you, I went to, prior to this 2014 election, I went to Jammu and Kashmir. I went to Jammu. Delegations of Jammu people came and they said, "We're very angry with you and we're not going to vote for you." So I was like, "Fine, why?" He's like, "Because, we are just angry with you and you are sort of being partial to the Kashmiris." Fine. Next delegation, I go to Srinagar, delegation comes, Kashmiris. And they look at me and say, "We're not voting for you." I say, "Why?" They say, "Well, because you're being partial to the Jammu guys." So, right, that's the problem. 6 months later, they came back. He said, "Baat nahi ban rahi." The Jammu guy says, "There's a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" The problem is that we have to have a conversation because nothing's happening without the conversation. And the same thing, Kashmiris came and said, "There's a problem." What's the problem? We can't work without a conversation. This conversation stopped, nothing's happening. So we are the conversation within India. We are chaotic. We are constant. We will get beaten by everybody because we are the conversation. Right? And our design is that. And what I'm saying to you here is that I'm worried that the conversation in India is stopping. And it's the systems that allow that conversation to take place are collapsing. And I know what happens in the Congress party when we stop the conversation. In a small little place. So I don't want to think about what happens when that conversation stops between 1.3 billion people. And that's the challenge that the Congress party is facing, in addition to the media dominance, the Facebook, WhatsApp, and all this stuff. The good news is that we're learning and we're getting people who would never, ever come and work with us to work with us. Right? So there's a reinvigoration of that system taking place. It's painful, which is fine, but it's happening. I don't know if that explains it. This is
very thoughtful set of comments. Thank you.
When I first came into this, I went to a senior Congress leader and I said, "Boss, ये क्या हो रहा है?" I said, "ये यहाँ पे मतलब 1-2 घंटा बैठते हैं, 3-4 घंटा बैठते हैं, जैसे एक ही चीज बोलते हैं." You know what he told me? He was an old timer. He said, "What are you saying?" He said, "I have seen meetings of 48 hours. He said, "This is nothing." He said, "आपने कुछ नहीं देखा." So that, of course, happens within our system. So you never see it.
So this is an argument that without a comprehensive conversation and negotiations between conversations, Congress party cannot function. That's what you're saying, right? It is just, that's the way it's structured.
I'll tell you the story that crystallized this in my mind, that just bang, it just blew it up. I was 13 years old, and I went on a trip with my grandmother to Yugoslavia. And my sister and me and my mother and my grandmother went to see Tito's wife. And Tito's wife, this old lady, had these two little puppies. We were playing with the puppies. My grandmother and my mother were talking to her. And I could overhear the conversation. And my grandmother asked her, "So, how are you doing?" And she says to me, "I'm doing okay." She says to my grandmother. And then my grandmother says, "How is Yugoslavia?" And she looked at my grandmother and she said, "Oh, Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore." So my grandmother said, "But why?" She says, "What are you saying?" And she said, "Well, because the relationship between the Serb and the Croat is broken." Anyway, I'd heard this and we were walking out, and my mother asked my grandmother the question. And she said, "Mummy, what is this woman saying? Like, Yugoslavia is not broken." And my grandmother said, "See, the problem is that her husband was all powerful in Yugoslavia. And he's just died, and she's not able to overcome that feeling that, now her husband is not running the show. So that's why she made the comment. Forgot about it." Then I was in Harvard in 90s, and I put on one day the TV and I saw that CNN, Yugoslavia civil war. And I was like, oh my God. What was the crux? The relationship between the Croat and the Serb was broken. She saw it in 83, 6 years ago. So all countries are negotiations. It's not only India. The United States is a negotiation. Right?
Thank you.
And yeah.
Thank you,
Sorry, I'm
Prerna.
going very long.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Prerna. Let's turn to our students. Is Bhanu joining us from Shimla, or do we have Bhanu? I can't see him. Let's turn to Arushi Kalra. Arushi, are you here?
Yeah, I am.
Arushi, you'll be on screen shortly. Yeah.
I had a question that relates to Professor.
Arushi is a PhD student in economics. Yeah.
I had a question that relates to Professor Patrick Heller's question. I was wondering why universal basic income, which you sort of hinted at in your response before, in the form of Nyay in Congress's election manifesto in 2019, did not take off electorally as one would have hoped for.
As I said, total dominance of the instruments of narrative creation. Look at the television during the time and see how many times Prime Minister Modi was mentioned and how many times Nyay was mentioned. So it is massive financial sort of domination and massive narrative control. Just go home, put on the TV, and look at the time you see the Prime Minister on television versus the time you see opposition leaders on television, and that will give you the answer. I need a fair media to put my message across. I need a fair social media setup to put my message across. If I can't put my message across, those are the instruments I have.
Thank you, Arushi. Bhanu has joined us from Shimla. Bhanu, your question. Bhanu Joshi is a PhD student in political science.
Hi, Rahul.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this. So my question is related to your comments about urban India, where 35% of Indians, now stay. So now the Congress Party has never really thought of our cities, towns, and cuspas as a key electoral constituency. Some research, including mine, sort of suggests that your competitor, the BJP, does much better if a constituency has a city or a town in it. So why doesn't Congress think about urban areas as being more empathetic to the Congress's sort of electoral calls? Beyond Indian cities as a key electoral vote constituency, I also wanted to hear your thoughts on the state of urban citizens, particularly those on the margins or who are, in the sense, the blood and sweat of the city. And now we all saw with dread how migrants with children on their backs and strapped onto luggage walked back to the villages, pointing to how inhospitable our cities are to those who build our cities, make it work. So I wanted to really hear your thoughts on why the Congress is not advocating for a radical overall of change in imagination, as you put it, of the local urban state and welfare architecture. So to summarize, why is the Congress not excited about urban India as an electoral
No,
constituency?
it is. It is excited about. It is excited about urban India, but the Congress, essentially, if you look at the role of the Congress in its post-independence early days, it was arbitraging rural power. It was managing the negotiation in rural India between the farmers, between the traders. That was what it was, between the laborers. It was managing that negotiation. A lot of our leaders are rural leaders. Our problem in Gujarat, for example, is our leaders are predominantly rural. They understand very well how to do the rural politics. But there is a contradiction between rural politics and urban politics. So when you're asking the question outside Mumbai, what are you going to do with water? My rural MLAs will say, listen, please send it to the fields. My urban MLAs will say, no, please don't send it to the fields, send it to Mumbai. So there's that contradiction. We're in a transition phase as a political party. You will see that as India becomes more urbanized, the Congress will start to develop power in the urban area. But we have got caught because our conversation, for example, in Gujarat is, okay, we have a rural strength, and now how do we transition to the urban? The BJP occupied the empty urban space. Right? They were not there in the rural. So it's not that we don't think about it. We do think about it. We are very successful in certain urban spaces. In Delhi, we were very, very successful for many years. Mumbai, we were very successful for many years. And then we made some mistakes, for example, in Delhi. But what was the second part of your question? The urban condition. Urban condition.
The migrants and the poor.
It's absolutely terrible. Again, you go back to the point I made about job creation. You are creating a situation where there are simply too many people who don't have a future, and they're living in the urban area. India does not have a job creation vision. It just does not, right? And without a job creation vision, without value addition, without transforming agriculture, you're not going to solve that problem. People are going to the cities in search of jobs. Nobody's left a village without wanting a job. And in the city, they're not finding the job. And so that is the one huge element of the problem. The second element of the problem is the politics of urban India. Rural India has traditional mechanisms. India has been a rural country for thousands of years. Our political system emerges from those mechanisms. A panchayat is not a new thing. Panchayati Raj is not 50 years old. It's thousands of years old, right? There is no such organic idea of a city. The idea of a city, of urban India, is a relative new idea compared to rural India, right? So the politics of urban India, especially with the rate at which the urbanization is playing out, are playing catch up. And certainly the institutional framework, the structures, they're not there yet. And we need to push them. If you ask me, the single biggest issue is decentralization of power. That you have to give more power to local body people, ward people in the urban areas. They're not, in North India, a mayor is powerless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, let's take two questions now together. So one is Sebastian Lusek in Delhi, and then second is Paulomi Chakravarti sitting here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Sebastian, Rahul, took a BA from Brown, and has been working in Delhi for over a year. And Paulomi took a PhD from Brown, is currently a postdoctoral scholar at Harvard, and also on the faculty at Queen's University in Canada. So why don't you, and she's a political scientist. So Sebastian and Paulomi, go ahead with your questions and make it briefer if possible. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, for joining us. My question for you is, on some issues, politicians can play a role in leading the people, while on other issues, politicians' actions and statements must be led by the preferences of the people. Over the course of your political career, what is an instance where you felt that you led the people? And what is one instance where you felt that you were led by the people? And how do you determine which issues fall into which category?
It's a dynamic process. So it's not that there are some instances where you're led by the people and then other instances where people lead you. It is a constant ongoing process where you're assimilating ideas. You listen to something they say, you agree with something they say, you assimilate that, you have an idea, you pass that idea on to them. So it's like a live, vibrant thing. It isn't that, oh, this is the decision that I have taken on my own. You're wearing that shirt. You might think that you wore that shirt on your own, but you couldn't wear that shirt without the person who made it. You couldn't wear the shirt without the person who made the buttons. You couldn't make the shirt without the guy who opened the door to the factory, etc., etc. So I don't think there is this notion that, oh, I came up with this idea. And there isn't also a notion that, oh, they came up with the idea. It sort of merges. One merges into the other, and then you get an outcome. I like to keep my ears open, and I find that I get huge amount of ideas from people that can inform my decisions. I'd be very worried making decisions, political decisions, without being informed and without listening. I'd be scared of doing that. So I think it's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Paulomi, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashu. So my question builds on the discussion that we've had on institutions and like the breakdown of institutions, and political parties themselves are institutions as well, right? So many would argue that the bigger crisis in Indian politics now is not majoritarianism, but it's the lack of an alternative. It's the lack of a strong opposition. There are people who don't like Modi, they don't like BJP, but they don't have anyone else to vote for. And there are political observers who know parties really well, who would argue that, the Gandhi family's vote really keeps the Congress together. But this can also be limiting, right? It's limiting in the sense that it does not allow for new leadership to flourish. And it also does not allow the space for a new political ideology to emerge that is more relevant to our times. And I know that you've stepped down as the president recently of the Congress party, but my question to you is the following. I mean, given the crisis at hand, and we know that the last few years have not been great, would the Gandhi family be willing to step aside from their control of the Congress party and to let new leadership flourish?
Look, the point is that I am fighting a ideological war. I believe in certain ideas and I defend those ideas. And I don't really care what my name is. Doesn't make me any difference. I don't even care who my grandfather was, I don't care about any of that. But there are certain ideas that I defend, right? And I'm going to defend them. I mean, whether anybody likes it or not, I'm going to defend them, right? Now, what's interesting to me is that nobody in my family has been prime minister for since 89, right? 99, so 21 years, no, 30 years. But there is an obsession that somehow we are in power, etc., etc. I have a role to play in the Congress party. The role to play in the Congress party is I defend a particular ideological current in the Congress party. And that's I believe strongly in that. I'm certainly not going to say, okay, thank you very much. I will now not defend that ideological position in the Congress just because somebody says I happen to be so-and-so's son. I mean, why should I, right? Now, question of should other people become leaders? Absolutely, 100%. And I'm more than happy to push as many leaders as possible and make as many of them successful. And that's my record. I, by the way, was never the prime minister of this country, right? And you can ask anybody in the Congress party, that's all I do all day long. I push people and I help develop people and I push them forward. But I don't take kindly to the idea that just because my father is someone, I now do not have the right to defend my political idea. Why? Why? I mean, why? Just because someone feels that it's inconvenient that I defend the political idea? It's interesting to me, right? I'm attacked every morning by the BJP. Every morning I'm kicked. I'm the only person, right, who actually sits there and attacks the prime minister. That's what I do every day. Now you want me to say, okay, stop? Why? I think I'm defending, as I said, I think I'm defending something which I fundamentally believe in.
I would argue that the critique would be intra-party democracy rather than the critique that you should not defend your ideology.
So I'm the person in the Congress party who has been pushing elections in the Congress party from day one. I've been mauled in the press because I push elections. Please just do a search on internal democracy in the Congress party and see the amount of abuse I got for it. It's interesting to me. When I'm pushing internal democracy, everybody's saying don't push it. Have you ever heard me say that the Congress party should not have elections? I've never said it. Right? And by the way, the next step, of course, is interesting, which is neither does the BJP have an election, neither does the BSP have an election, neither does any other political party have an election. But for some reason, which I agree with, because I believe that we have a bigger responsibility for some of the reasons that I outlined earlier. I believe that we should absolutely have elections and we should absolutely elect our leaders. But it's interesting to me that that's not something people expect of any other party. Nobody's ever said, I've never read in the newspaper, why is Mayawati ji not having elections? Never heard it. I've never heard that, why is the BJP not having an election? Why is there not an election in the RS? I never heard it. It's fascinating to me. And the reason is clear. The reason is because people don't like the negotiation. The problem is the negotiation. They don't like this conversation that takes place in the Congress party. It's the only party in the country that has it. You simply cannot have the conversations that you have in the Congress party in any other political party. I've got example after example. Have you asked yourself the question why you've never had a conversation like this with the Prime Minister?
Thank you. Thank you. The one question is from one of our undergraduates who is actually from Bosnia-Herzegovina. Salko Zlatko has a very simple biographical question for you. Salko, go ahead. Go ahead. He is a senior in computer science, last year of computer science. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, sir, for spending your time with us today. I wanted to ask you a more inwardly reflective question, which is, was there a specific moment in your life when you decided to dedicate yourself to public service, and what drove you to do so?
No, it's a sort of evolution. There's no specific moment. There's no event as such. Of course, certain things impacted me. My father's assassination impacted me, for example. My grandmother's assassination impacted me. But it was an ongoing conversation. That's what we discussed, I guess. When we were kids, we discussed that. We are sort of, I think, we were brought up in my family with this whole nationalistic idea, very strong. There was sort of no question in my mind of not defending this idea. It just was like, it didn't arise, so to speak. So when I see that idea being attacked, I don't see any other way except saying, okay, I don't accept this. But there was no particular. I would say that the more the idea is attacked, the more I stick my heels in. If you had said to me, like the lady asked me the question, why don't you sort of step aside? If you had said to me when I wasn't facing the RSS, I'd be like, yeah, I could do that. But if you say to me that there is this monster that is coming at the ideas that I believe in, then I'd say no. I will not back down.
But the personal losses did not drive you away from politics. Your father and your grandmother being assassinated, that didn't drive you away from politics at all. In fact, the opposite.
No, I saw them as, it made it very clear to me that they were fighting for something. It took me some time to refine what it is that they were fighting for, and I'm still not there. You can see, I mean, my explanation to you is crude, and I hope this sort of develops over the next 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years. But I have a better sense of what exactly it is that I am supposed to defend. And it's not an external thing. It's actually an internal thing. What Mrs. Gandhi and me were talking about. It's much more internal for me.
Thank you. We have come to the last assigned minute of this conversation. On behalf of Brown University, Center for Contemporary South Asia, and Watson Institute at Brown, let me express my profound thanks to Rahul Gandhi for giving us 90 minutes of his time, discussing a wide range of issues from economics to politics to spirituality. The idea of shunyata is going to make news, that you have to forget your existence sometimes in order to move forward. So thank you very, very much, Rahul, for your time and for your thoughts. And if you have any final comment to make, please do.
I would just make one thing which came to my mind, right?
Yeah.
Which is that I'm speaking to a foreign university, right? I'm speaking to Brown, and I'm speaking to Indian students in a foreign university. And I was asking myself this question. I was like, why am I not speaking to an Indian university? Right? Just now when you were talking, I was like, why am I not doing this to an Indian university? And the answer is, I'm not allowed to. Right? I'm actually not allowed to speak to an Indian university. If I try to do this with an Indian university, the government says you cannot do it. And they threaten the vice chancellor, they do all that. So that's also a huge part of the democratic space. I would love to have this type of a conversation with Indian students in India. And as a politician, that would be something I would love to do. I would love to hear what they say. I'd like to listen to their criticism. I'd like to understand what they're saying. I'd like to inform them of what I'm seeing, but I'm not allowed.
Thank you very much, Rahul Gandhi, for your time. This video, the video of this conversation, will go on our YouTube channel, Watson Institute's YouTube channel, so that it can be watched as widely as possible. It has been a pleasure to host you, Rahul, and pleasure to have this very wide-ranging discussion with you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Lovely chatting to you and everybody else. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.